Give me that. This is my remote. Look. Look at that. Somebody has new teeth. Somebody has big adult teeth. Look, okay. Today is March 11th. I figured I'd just update you because it's been quite a while since I've updated you on my story. Although I'm still on schedule. Do you remember I showed you my schedule? I technically have until tomorrow to finish the chapter that I'm currently on. Although I kind of wanted to be done with part 3, but I added another chapter. And so I basically just, same amount of scenes. I've just given myself an extra chapter. I'm about 70,000 words into the story. And we're only about 3/5 of the way through it. I just wrote a whole new scene in a new environment that I have never written in. So I kind of had to do some world building, give it a name, give it some aesthetics, create the environment of it. So that was fun. It ended up turning out a little bit differently than I was expecting. I've noticed that a couple of the scenes I've written have things happening in them that I wasn't expecting to happen for like a few more chapters. So it ends up like pushing things forward a little bit more than I was expecting. Like the chapter I'm currently in the middle of is doing that as well. Come back here. So this might lead to some more plot reorganization as we go forward, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Ultimately, I think it probably just makes things a bit more exciting and a bit more fast-paced because things are happening sooner. Alright, so it's almost 7:30, same day, and I am about to go on to chapter 24 because I finished chapter 23. The chapter that I wrote today was a combination of previously existing scenes that needed to be edited and brought up to code, draft 13 code, so to speak, and writing things from scratch. And so it was about 3,900 words total. But now I'm on to chapter 24, which is going to be like the most exciting chapter thus far. Ooh. And then that's my goal tonight, is just to finish chapter 24. And then maybe I'll reward myself with some Chicago Med, which I now have access to again. Hello, it's just after 10 p.m. and I have just finished part 3 of my story. That means that, okay, so between yesterday and today, I have written 3 entire chapters, okay? I've told you about my schedule in order to finish this draft by May 31st. This week, which ends tomorrow, Sunday, my goal was to finish chapters 22 and 23. However, I added a chapter. Yeah, I wanted to finish part 3 by the end of this week. So that means next week, I start part 4. I was looking ahead at my next 2 chapters that I have to write, so chapters 25 and 26. And both of those, it's 7 scenes total spread across these 2 chapters. I think there's 1 scene that's a recycled scene that I'll just update, but I think the other 6 scenes are going to be written from scratch, if I have that correctly. But I think at least half of them are going to be shorter scenes, and they're pretty straightforward, so it shouldn't be too difficult. My issue often lies with not knowing what I want the scene or the chapter to be about. You know, like I need to know, like, how is this scene moving the story forward? What are we learning about the characters or about the world or about the plot? And if I don't know that, like, concretely, specifically, when I'm going into the chapter, most of the time it ends up stalling me, and that's how I often end up on these accidental story breaks. Oh, I'm so proud of myself. It's days like this where I feel like the progress I'm making moving forward, I could actually meet my deadline.
But he only has 1 kidney to begin with.
Yeah, he donated the other to his father 25 years ago.
Wow, this is a really flattering angle. I am yawning every 5 minutes. It's 4 p.m. on March 15th. Allie and AJ's album With Love From came out, and I keep getting partway through it and then getting interrupted somehow, so I still haven't listened to it all the way through. I'm working on chapter 26. I've just finished the first 2 scenes of the chapter, but I think it's going to be a longer chapter. Last night I outlined the whole thing in my notebook. Have that whole page of just bullet points of here's what's going to happen, and then this happens, and then this happens in this chapter. Just because it was late last night and I didn't feel like actually writing it. My eye has been twitching all day, my right eye. So I think I might be fatigued / stressed. Every time that I say that I'm stressed, it sounds ridiculous even to my own ear as somebody who's currently unemployed. But there are other things to life to stress about besides work. Back to chapter 26. I'm so tired. I think I'm gonna go to bed at 8 p.m. tonight. See, 4,519 words for chapter 26. And see, finished 3:15. Okay, I just finished my chapters for this week. Okay, that last chapter, a lot happened and it needs some work. It took like 2 different scenes that I've written in previous drafts that were like really not linked at all, but I connected them in this chapter, wrote a little bit from scratch, brought it up to draft 13 code, and then now there's a couple of things that I have to go back and set up that this chapter, being from a previous draft, brings to the story. And if it ends up being too much to add it in, then I can always take it out. But also drama just happened, so that's good. But anyway, so next is chapter 27. Ooh, that's gonna be awkward. For Race, it's gonna be awkward for my main character because she just had a run-in with this character and it wasn't good, and now she's gonna be forced to learn from this character. I'm actually changing a scene so that Race is, instead of interacting with one character, she's going to interact with this other character because it brings this other character into the story more. Good morning. It is Thursday morning. It's like 8:30 now, I think. 8:53. And I have just added 1,100 words to chapter 26. I added 2 more smaller scenes that needed to happen. So this chapter is now 5,631 words. I told you it was going to be a big one. It includes like 5 or 6 scenes. Moving on to chapter 27. Now, I have decided that one of the scenes that was supposed to happen in chapter 27 should now instead happen after a scene that happens in chapter 28. One character kind of has to change his mind on something in order for this character to be able to be in this next scene. These are the index cards that I have written, and these are the ones that are left to write. So it looks like a lot more than it is, but I think it's just that there are more smaller scenes as opposed to like there are more big scenes here. So I think there's a couple of scenes that I can move that are just now written last night. Yeah, these 3, I can add them to the scenes I've already written. Yay! I think it's time for second breakfast, but I'm watching little baby Satue. She just got spayed, so she can't run around and really do anything for 2 weeks, so she basically has to like lay there for 2 weeks. That's such a long time. So I'm back a few minutes later and I realized that chapter 27 is kind of redundant. A scene that was going to happen kind of would just only reveal things she already has learned previously in the story, so that scene is null and void. So I think I might just nix chapter 27 and instead go straight into 28, which is now going to become chapter 27. Okay, here's the thing now about the new chapter 27. This next scene is a very big scene in the story, and it requires a lot of writing from scratch. And I don't know, it's an intimidating scene to write, is what it is. Now, there is a scene that I wrote in a previous draft. I could take that scene and put it here in chapter 28, or rather, what's now chapter 27. But it's not really a perfect match of the current plot. Like, it kind of is like, it's fine for now, but in the future I'd like to think of a better scene. Yeah, you got the notebook a little lighter. too. Can I use your back to ride on? No, I'm just kidding. Okay. That's another one of those sounds you are always drawn to. There are ads going on the TV behind me, so do regard those. Also disregard my hair. I took out my braids today and I haven't washed it yet, but it's really poofy and it's grown. Oh, okay, we've got someone here to inspect my nose. Part of her recovery is that she's very clingy and that she comes close to you and she always wants to touch you, and the doctor said that's because she doesn't really know how else to tell you that she's either uncomfortable or in pain. She's taken her meds for the day, so there's not really anything we can do except just give her cuddles and lots of love, which I have definitely been doing all day. Anyway, I'm here because I caught up with you this morning. Can I just say, it took me 3 episodes of Chicago Med to take my braids out, which is a record for me because it normally takes me like 10 hours with lots of breaks and a couple of mental breakdowns. Because I hate getting my hair done. So chapter 27, the new chapter 27. I have said that it's going to be a big scene and that I had a pre-written scene from a previous draft that I could use, and that it wasn't necessarily the best, version of the scene that it could be given this new draft. And I've had a little think about it. And I think that actually it could work. And it's not just because I'm lazy and want to get through the draft, but it's absolutely because of that. Even so, I think it could work. So, because what this next scene needs to do basically is give my main character a chance to show what she can do. Essentially, like she can. Look what she's doing to my notebook. That's rude. I don't think she likes the idea of what I'm talking about. What is it, boo boo? Okay, I'm gonna put this up here so it's safe from you. I'm gonna give you some cuddles and kisses. Is that what you need? Yep, I'll take that as a yes. This is the furthest I have been into a draft, and it's the furthest I've been into a draft of Stormcloud in a very long time. Is that right? No, 3.5 years since before the pandemic. So this is gonna be a bigger book. Good morning. It's the next morning, and I'm about to eat my breakfast. I've got oatmeal and cereal here, and I've got some tea boiling on the stove. And I figure I open up my notebook beside me while I write instead of scrolling through my phone or watching videos on YouTube, which is what I normally do. Every now and then it's good to mix it up. I feel like my tea is sending me smoke signals. Look at those spirals of smoke or steam. Can you even see that? There's like 3 swirls going on. Look at that. It's pretty cool. Hello. So it is my hair. What is it? It's Saturday, March 18th. It's like 10 p.m. almost, and I'm working on chapter 27. The issue that I'm feeling in the middle of working on this chapter, looking ahead at some of the next scenes that are going to have to happen, is instead of, I guess it's a lot of significant standalone type scenes that are all important. You know, it's like at the beginning half of the story, things are kind of flowing between one another. We're still getting to know people and the world and the plot and everything. Things are happening, but I guess there's less space between major reveals. What's happening now is that the pace is picking up a lot more because now you're going from scene to scene where each scene is like super important because we're starting to approach the climax now. We're in part 4. We're building up to the main pinnacle of the story. It's starting to feel like it's not flowing as much. Instead of flowing from one scene to the next, it's kind of just like jerking along. While this is something that I would worry more about during line editing or something, I only bring this up because it kind of affects my impression of the story as I write it. And I feel like my impression of the story can come through in the writing. Every single time I sit down to write, it's going to be a big, intimidating scene. I guess the remedy for this is just to pull out my notebook maybe more often, and before I sit down to write the scene, make a list or think through what the scene needs to accomplish. What do I need to know by the end of the scene? What needs to have happened in the story by the end of this scene? And that helps me to kind of, as I'm going along, it's like laying breadcrumbs for me to follow as I write. I'm looking at this next scene and like it's yet another potentially redundant scene. You know, sometimes you have to write these fluff scenes where you're just writing the story for yourself, for you to understand what's going on, but then you realize that it's redundant ultimately. You don't need the scene there, and you might make that decision when you're looking back and revising the story. But I'm finding that these scenes are not redundant as I'm plotting them out, but as I'm writing through them, I look ahead and see scenes that will be redundant. So maybe that scene that's going to become redundant was going to reveal something. But then, as I'm like 5 chapters before that, I end up revealing that thing in a different way. But now it's made it so that scene doesn't need to happen. So, I don't know if I'm getting too in my head about the next few scenes being intimidating, or if I'm just not in the right headspace to make big decisions about making changes in my story, or what. But I just, don't really know how to wrap up the scene that I'm currently in, number 1. Number 2, the next scene that I'm supposed to write, I've come up with a reason why it's no longer necessary. Number 3, as I look ahead at the rest of part 4, part 4 is just big intimidating scene after big intimidating scene after big intimidating scene. Part 5, we start at the climax. There's a few scenes around there. And then after the climax, it's just, obviously it's the resolution. I'm so looking forward to writing all the evolution scenes because it's like at that point the stakes have passed. And it's just like a lot of chill things that are happening as we recover. But I'm just like, I'm looking ahead and I just do not see how in the world I'm ever going to be able to write the rest of this part 4. Obviously, I'm looking too far ahead. I'm thinking of all the big things at once as opposed to breaking it down into what they actually are, which is individual scenes. I guess this is not normal. This is normal is what I'm trying to say. To be looking at how far I've come. Okay, I'm so close to the end of the story. I know it's normal at this point. Like I remember back when I was working on draft 2, summer 2017, I was about to write the climax. And I remember feeling that I didn't want to write it. I ended up writing the climax and the resolution of the story like in an afternoon, like 3 hours. I know from that experience, from other experiences like with Pitchfork, from other experiences with this draft, that it's not as scary as it seems. But I think I'm mixing all the big plot things that are coming up with all the big life things that are coming up. Like we're about to go on our next big trip, and I've been anxious about that for a while. When I think about each place that we're going on its own, I'm excited about each place. I'm excited about some of the things we can do in each place. But if I think about the trip as a whole, then I'm really kind of anxious and intimidated about it. I kind of almost want to just get through it. I want to have gone on this trip, not be about to go on the trip. It's just crazy how life changes because like before the pandemic, half of the fun of a trip was the anticipation of it, the planning of it, the getting excited for all the cool things you could do. But since the pandemic, I've just been like anxious about traveling, which is like crazy because it has been anyway, one of my favorite things in the world. It's one of the things that makes me feel like a human. check in with you later. Hopefully I'll have a brighter perspective on things. I still have not watched an episode of Chicago Med today. Maybe that's what I need. Maybe I just need to step back for the day, watch an episode of Chicago Med, turn off my brain, come back to it later with brand new eyes. I persevered and pushed through, and I finished chapter 27. It's interesting, maybe a little different than I might have expected, but I finished it, and I can fix it later. Have to constantly keep reminding myself that it doesn't have to be perfect. Good morning. It's the 19th, Sunday. I'm working on chapter 28, and one thing that I'm realizing is how last night I was talking about how there's like big scene after big scene after big scene. One thing that I need to make sure I have is just lulls between those highs. Just enough time for the characters to decompress and to process what's just happened. And also it helps there to be like an ebb and flow of tension, so it's not just going all the time, but at the same time you're not just like sitting back all the time being bored. And then the other thing is, so I have a timeline for my story. The entire story takes place in about 3 months, from the beginning of fall to the beginning of winter. The climax of my story is supposed to happen on the winter solstice, and where I am in the story, I'm actually in the middle of November, so I have over a month of time to get through, but I know that the events that I have between where I am now and the climax will not take a month. They might take a couple of weeks at best. So I'm gonna have to fudge the timeline a bit. I think this is something that maybe I'll do more of when I do a revision, because then I can go back earlier in the draft and put more space between things. Hello, so it's Tuesday, March 21st, I believe. I just came back from the library, me and John, and we were there for a couple of hours, and I worked on chapter 27 again. When I wrote chapter 27 a couple days ago, the conversation that was being had led in one direction, but I realized that wasn't quite right. But I decided today, when I was at the library, to just rewrite the end of the chapter, so that way it went to this other direction, and now I know how to move forward. And so I finished chapter 27, and then I started chapter 28. So technically this week I'm supposed to finish chapter 28, but it's a very busy week, so I will do my best. And also, as I was figuring out that scene, the beginning of chapter 28, I realized that the rest of chapter 28 and then chapters 29 and 30, all the scenes that are happening there needed to kind of be moved around a little bit. And so I did that. I reshuffled them. Good morning. It is, I think it's Friday, March 24th. Yes, because Lana Del Rey's album came out today. So my plan is to listen to that album today as I do a little bit of writing. Today is the last full day we have to work on packing. Okay, we have to pack for our trip. We leave on Sunday, which is 2 days from now. It's Camp NaNoWriMo next month. And my plan is to continue working on draft 13 of Stormcloud, finishing the draft, getting to the end, and then that way, in order to reach my deadline, I can use the entire month of May to work on catching up, going back and writing scenes that I have since realized need to be included. Basically just making any changes according to my running list of changes that I've been contributing to steadily throughout the draft. It's got over 20 items on it. Anything from add a scene here about this, or we never quite wrap this up, or make this change. But I'm still in the middle of chapter 28. I finished 2 scenes yesterday, and then I was about to start the next scene, and I realized that would it make sense even anyway? I feel like this scene needs to happen in some way before chapter 30, because chapter 30 is like when a really huge thing happens. And then my other thing with chapter 30 is I have to figure out it's a big thing that happens, sort of this thing that my characters have been anticipating for a few chapters, and so I want to make sure that it contributes and moves the story forward in some significant way, and that it's not just there for shock value. please excuse the mess behind me on the bed. I am about to start packing like my notebooks and that kind of miscellaneous items. But I just wanted to wrap up the vlog and let you know that I finished chapter 28, the third scene of that chapter, which I wasn't sure about how to go about it, I guess. I've decided to get rid of it because there's a more powerful way, I think, to have that scene play out in a later chapter. So, finished chapter 28 at 4,198 words. And then I started chapter 29, so I did the first scene of that. Chapter 29 and 30 are next week's chapters, technically. I don't really see that I'm going to be able to write anymore this week. Like I said, there's a lot going on. And then next week will be interesting because we'll be in Singapore. So I don't know how much writing I'm going to get done throughout the next few weeks, but we will certainly do our best because, again, Camp NaNoWriMo starts. And I have this deadline to give myself, so I'm doing pretty good on the deadline so far, but the rest remains to be seen. This was the notebook that I finished during this draft, and in it I had been logging my chapter counts for this draft, but because that is pretty much the only reason I picked up this notebook in the last few weeks is to record my chapter counts. I don't want to travel with it. Yeah, there are a couple of notes in here that would be useful to reference, but at the same time, I think I could get by without them. So I transcribed all the chapter counts into one note, so that way I can just continue to keep track of them there. And yeah, we are in the home stretch, folks. I think there are 3 or 4 chapters before the climax of the story. We are right around the 100,000 word mark of the novel. So, it's a big baby. It's a big baby. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one in Asia.